Hi. We're going to continue on with this audiobook of Taming Your Mind. I'm on chapter 7, Differences May Make a Difference. And I'm going to switch to Tools for Thinking. Let's try that again. Okay. So we have tools for thinking, and you just got a brief little view of me. And hopefully the audio is going to be a little better. I've adjusted the settings. We start off with a poem, or a little quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Nature never rhymes her children, nor makes two men alike. And then Ken Keyes Jr. begins. In the past 3 chapters, we have reviewed our plight as thinkers who, by the nature of things, must struggle along with incomplete knowledge in a degree world with minds that have personal idiosyncrasies. And we have only begun to find out about things that threaten to upset our verbal maps if we are not vividly aware of them. In this and the following 2 chapters, we will discuss other characteristics of the world that make it difficult for us to produce adequate maps. As in the last 3 chapters, we will find tools for thinking that will keep these monkey wrenches from jamming our mental machinery for making reliable verbal maps. We live in a world in which no 2 things are alike in all respects. We cannot, for example, meet 1 or 2 or even a dozen Cubans and generalize about all Cubans. We cannot use one electric razor and make verbal maps that cover all electric razors. Each individual is in some ways unique. Up to a point, they're all different. Look anywhere you want for 2 things that are alike in all respects. 2 grains of sand, 2 peas in a pod, 2 people, 2 fingernails, 2 leaves on a tree, or 2 sticks of chewing gum. You will find many things that are similar. You will have no trouble finding things that for your purposes are interchangeable. But so far as I know, you will never find 2 things that are absolutely identical. In spite of mass production and careful inspection, no 2 cars ever produced at a factory are absolutely identical. They may look alike from outside the show window, and the price on each may be the same, but each car will have its own particular pattern of strength and weakness. Various nuts and bolts and screws will be tightened to different degrees and will rattle apart at different times. Microscopic flaws and cracks in the metal parts will exist in different places and will play different parts in the process of deterioration. The packages of toothpicks and matches we buy are amazingly alike, up to a point. But when we pull out a magnifying glass, or if necessary, a microscope, the differences begin to show up. And a little aside from the text here, think about that the next time you're buying toothpicks and matches. I'm not sure I've bought any toothpicks in many decades, and definitely not any matches in many decades. Okay, back to the text. Differences Distance makes for seeing similarities. Nearness helps us to see differences. Two cars that are 3 miles away, even though different models and colors, will seem identical to the unaided eye. As we get closer, the differences are noticeable. From across a pasture, it would be difficult to tell a bull from a cow, but we make no mistake at close range. From down the block, two lampposts may look identical. From our yard, the leaves on the neighbor's trees look alike. From across the room, it is difficult to distinguish two phonograph records from the same album. If we hold two new razor blades from the same package in our hand, we have difficulty distinguishing between them until we use a magnifying glass to get us closer. Two highly polished steel balls may appear identical even with a magnifying glass, but differences will be easily seen when a microscope brings us 1,000 times closer. And we have a little cartoon drawing on the left of page 93. It's captioned, "Distance makes things appear similar. Nearness helps us see differences." And there's two women looking at a group of kids up in a tree. And one is saying to the other, "Thank goodness my Billy doesn't climb trees like that." And then they walk up the path closer to the tree, and she goes, "Billy!" So that was pretty funny, huh? Okay, continuing on. How group words mislead us. As should be apparent by now, we live in a world where we can easily be misled by the words we use if we do not automatically remember that two things may be labeled alike and yet act quite differently. This is something that most of us, quote unquote, know, but few people ever think about the problem enough to realize its extensive implications and to figure out how they can meet it in their thinking habits. Instead, we blithely go on using language and thinking habits that often lead us to make fools of ourselves. And I'm going to get a drink here. Please remember, group words such as man, house, dog, Californian, tree, etc., that is, all collective and abstract nouns, do not tell us what kind, when, and where. Due to faulty language and thinking habits, all of us have picked up from our teachers, parents, playmates, and others, we tend to assume we are talking about something definite and specific when we use a group word, as for instance, dog. Actually, animals that are properly labeled dog will range from sassy little handfuls of canininity, like the Mexican Chihuahua, to massive Great Danes. Dogs will range from sweet-tempered and patient animals that will take any amount of abuse from children whom they love, to paranoid and pugnacious mutts that probably dream of such delicious adventures as severing human jugular veins. Under the word dog, you'll find sickly, persnickety animals that have grown accustomed to 97 cents a pound hamburger that has been properly cooked and salted, to animals that do well for themselves just foraging off neighborhood garbage cans. Dogs may be found that are fit only for cuddling on milady's lap. There are other dogs that will protect the house against burglars, rescue drowning children, do tricks such as jumping through flaming rings and barking to 10, herd sheep, go on sentry duty, or carry a cask of brandy to people lost in the snow. Anyone who says that he likes dogs is liking a whole lot, and anyone who says he doesn't like dogs is disliking a whole lot. If our language is to grab hold of reality, if we are to make maps that represent the territory and have a high degree of predictability, we must remember that thinking in terms of groups can often mislead us if we are not aware of the dangers. There are no automobiles in general, dogs in general, or men in general adrift in our world. There are only specific individuals of many, many different kinds that do things in definite places at definite times. And all these individuals may act in some ways different from others that are labeled by the same name. And before we go on to the Watt Index, I'll describe the drawing on page 94 to the left of 95. It's captioned, "Group words can mislead us." And there's a man in a sailor uniform and a woman in a dress, and he's reading a book, and she's saying to him, they're both sitting on a couch, "Tell me something. Are all French sailors like you?" I'm not really sure why that drawing is supposed to be funny, although it does kind of relate to the overall point. So let's go ahead with the Watt Index. The tool for thinking that helps us think in terms of definite individuals is called the Watt Index. This is simply a number added to a group word. For example, dog 1, dog 2, dog 3, etc. Man 1, man 2, man 3, etc. Chair 1, chair 2, chair 3, etc. Please reread the following definition of the Watt Index several times. Then look at it again frequently while you are finishing this chapter. I don't know how we're going to adapt that instruction to an audio book, but I will try. The Watt Index is simply a number that is added to a group word to give us a feeling of referring to a specific person or thing. The basic principle of this entire chapter is that no two individuals are identical. Here is how we say it with index numbers. Dog 1, parentheses, a bulldog, is not dog 2, parentheses, a Great Dane. Dog 2, a Great Dane, is not dog 3, a poodle, etc., etc. Also, dog 1, a bulldog with a white ring around left eye, is not dog 2, a bulldog with a ring around both eyes, is not dog 3, a bulldog with scar between eyes, etc., etc. When we apply the index numbers to people, we find that man 1 is not man 2, Man 2 is not man 3. Man 3 is not man 4. Man 16 is not man 17, etc. And that's the end of page 97. To the left, we've got another drawing. Don't be misled by words. Dog 1 is not dog 2. And a guy is bending over to pet a dog, and a woman, presumably his wife, is with him. And he's saying, "I love dogs. Man's best friend, you know." And next, they're leaving M. Williams, MD office. The man's arm is bandaged up, and the caption says, or rather the text, "We'd better read that chapter on index numbers tonight." So I don't think they're trying to be funny. I think they're just trying to make the point. I'm going to reread the definition before I go on to page 98 in order to respect his instructions. The Watt index is simply a number that is added to a group word to give us a feeling of referring to a specific person or thing. And now we'll take a pause before 98. That was good. When we stop to think about it, we can see that we've been using index numbers all our lives, but in the past, we've just used them for certain things. For example, we assign index numbers to our streets and houses, such as 142 Southwest 3rd Street. We apply index numbers to the floors of buildings, floor 1, 2, 3, etc. The armed services assign serial numbers to all personnel. So why not use distinguishing numbers with all group words to remind us of differences between individual people and things? Mental ghosts. When Peter was 5 years old, his mother ran away with a traveling salesman. After a year, his father married a woman who had 2 daughters several years older than Peter. The older girls made fun of Peter and giggled at him. He would try to get even by fighting back. The stepmother would then separate them and scold Peter for fighting. As he grew up, Peter felt more and more resentment toward these women in his life. At the age of 16, he got a job, left home, and lived by himself. At the grocery store where he was working, he met a young girl, went out with her a few times, and fell deeply in love with her, until she jilted him in favor of a flashy young chap who had just acquired a shiny new convertible. Just as he was beginning to decide that women were no good, he met a sympathetic young lady with a beautiful profile who made him forget his troubles. They became engaged shortly before he went into the army. Before Peter went overseas, he got a short leave. On returning home for a surprise visit, he found his fiancée with another man in her bedroom. Peter was shocked and hurt, but he told himself he should have expected it. He should have known that women, all women, were no good, beginning with his mother who had deserted him. with his stepmother and her two brats, with the first girl who had jilted him and the second one who was untrue. They were all alike, insincere, heartless, and not to be trusted at all. He made up his mind never to be fooled by women again. Now the ghosts of the women he has known are projected onto every girl he meets. Girls, he advises, are okay for a little adventure, but if you have any sense, you won't take them seriously. They're all just alike. They'll fool you every time. Peter needs those index numbers badly. He is confusing all women with the few with whom he has had unfortunate experiences. His unfortunate experiences with woman 1, woman 2, woman 3, woman 4, and woman 5 make him unable to see clearly woman 6, woman 7, woman 8, woman 9, etc. He needs the index numbers to help him get these ghosts out of his mind. He has a mental set that makes him see all women as similar. He has become so embittered that he is actually unable to admit the possibility of differences that make a difference. Unindexed words are sometimes like mental ghosts. They recall to our minds the shape of things in the past. If it were possible to know all about something, and if the world did not keep changing, then we could be sure that our past experiences would be perfect guides for the future. We could summon up these ghosts of the past and let them tell us how to act for all time. But as long as we live in a changing world about which our knowledge is incomplete, we must be mighty careful how we rely upon the lessons we have absorbed in the past. So that's the bottom of page 100. I'm going to go back and talk about a picture that I didn't skip over to avoid getting in the way of the little story about Peter and the women. We've got cow 1 is not cow 2. Sometimes it's a lot of bull as the caption. And there's a guy sitting in a cow milking it, and another guy trying to warn him about a bull that's coming at him from the other direction. And the guy is saying, "Don't bother me, I know my cows." It doesn't really seem like an index issue. It seems more like a you can't know everything kind of problem, but I don't want to criticize taming your mind. I'm going to go on with page 101 after reading that definition one more time because he asked us to repeat it. Here it is. The what index is simply a number that is added to a group word to give us a feeling of referring to a specific person or thing. Similarities and differences. The group word women reminds us of the similarities among all the things labeled by the word women. The index numbers remind us of the differences that exist among all women. If we are to think maturely, we must be aware of both similarities and differences. Pardon me for a moment. That was a good sip. We will get into trouble, for example, if we act as though all women are similar in all respects. We will also get into trouble if we act as though all women are different in all respects. By adding index numbers to our group words, we can achieve a way of thinking and speaking that will help remind us of both similarities and differences. By using the index numbers, we can theoretically have a specific word or symbol for every person and thing in the universe. Let us see how this might work out. Our habit of thinking about the American woman, the typical Californian, or the Southerner tends to make us overlook the great differences that exist between individuals that are so labeled as types. Granted that individuals in the above-mentioned groups may be similar in one or more ways, the differences for our purposes may often be more important than the similarities. At any rate, we cannot make adequate verbal maps if we overemphasize either the differences or the similarities. We must be aware of both. Our ordinary language tends to imply similarity simply because we label things by the same name. We need the index numbers to remind us of differences. Remember that the what index is simply a number that is added to a group word to give us a feeling of referring to a specific person or thing. Give it time to sink in. When you first read this, you may feel that a mountain is being made out of a molehill, and that all this discussion of similarities and differences about dog 1, dog 2, dog 3, etc., is not for you. But if you will continue to think about these principles, you will find that you have a thoroughly practical application in your everyday life. It is not easy to understand the underlying significance of the index numbers by reading about them. You must live with them a while to find out what they can mean to you in your problem solving. You may not understand the importance of index numbers until you've been chagrined several times because you did not notice differences between objects that were labeled alike, but that for your purposes acted differently. You must learn to say to yourself, I know that woman 1 is not woman 2, that business client 1 is not business client 2, that politician 1 is not politician 2, and so on. You'll have to notice for yourself how deeply set is your tendency to regard things labeled by the same name as the same. Now let us find out more about how the index numbers can help us. And we're on page 103. To the left is a drawing by Ted Key that says similarities can mislead us, and it shows a guy walking into a house in the suburbs, and the houses are all kind of alike, and he actually puts away his coat in the closet before he sees that the woman there, who's partially undressed, is not his wife, and he runs next door to his wife. Okay. The next section is averages do not tell us anything about man 1 or thing 1. Generalizations that correctly apply to groups may be misleading when slapped on any particular individual in the group. For example, suppose a man setting up a shoe store read that the average man wears an 8.5B shoe. He would go out of business in a hurry if he ordered nothing but 8.5B shoes. Actually, this size is worn by only a small percentage of the people. A shoe store must fit man 1, man 2, man 3, etc. Frequently, an average does not fit many individuals. No matter how accurate your average picture is, you still do not know about whether it actually fits a particular individual. Man 1 or woman 1 or thing 1, until you use your own eyes and survey the territory for yourself. Often it is convenient to have at our fingertips average or general pictures of things. In planning a generator plant, an electric company will need reliable figures about the average amount of electricity used in the homes in its territory. In planning our budget, we will need to know the average amount we spend on food, clothing, and other items. We frequently get so used to thinking in terms of averages that we forget they are only useful in dealing with groups. An average figure, no matter how accurate, will not tell us anything definite about a given individual. The only way we will get an adequate map of a specific individual is to survey the territory. Let me repeat. No matter how accurate an average picture is, we cannot be sure that it applies to any individual person or thing until we examine the territory. An average map is valid only so long as we are talking about a group. For example, suppose you knew that during the last year, your average meal cost 98 cents. From this figure, you could not predict that your lunch tomorrow will cost exactly 98 cents. It may be more or less, period. And a little break for a drink. And before I start the next section, the drawing on the right of page 104, in other words 105, shows a little kid being brought into a room with his father presumably holding a stick. And he's saying, "But you laughed when Henry Aldrich did it." I think I might have to look up who Henry Aldrich is to get that. And I'm not sure that Ken Keyes or Ted Key are saying that they think hitting kids with corporal punishment is a good idea, but that's the little drawing. So now, going on with the next section. Hunt for differences that make a difference. I have tucked away in my brain a generalized notion of lions. According to my ideas, lions are pretty ferocious animals. This generalization reminds me to stay away from uncaged lions. Now, I am not going to use the index numbers in such a way as to get chewed up. I am not going overboard by saying lion 1 is not lion 2, lion 2 is not lion 3, etc. And perhaps lion 3, being different from lion 2, will not attack me. Despite the fact that I know each of these lions is in some ways different, I am not going to let the index numbers lead me into surveying that particular territory for myself. I would regard that as a misuse of the index numbers. Only you can decide when it is appropriate to use this tool. The principle is true in all situations. Lion 1 is not lion 2. However, for my purposes, lion 1 may act the same as lion 2. We know as a scientific fact that there are differences between all individual things, but we also know as a personal fact that for our own purposes, there may be no practical difference. As in using any other tool, you must experiment with the index numbers to find out how to use them. Look behind the words. Here's why we need index numbers. Once we learn to smile or frown at any particular label, we tend to be almost blind to the things behind the label. From then on, we accept or reject them on a basis of their labels. We do not look at the individual things. We don't think we need to. We do not try to see how they work or why some people like or dislike them. We do not try to increase our understanding of them or try to find out if more knowledge would give us more insight. Let Mark Twain tell you how people learned to react to his cigars and how they lost all ability to survey that territory. And this section is a bit indented, so it's from Mark Twain concerning tobacco, What is Man? Reprinted by permission. People who claim to know say that I smoke the worst cigars in the world. They bring their own cigars when they come to my house. They betray an unmanly terror when I offer them a cigar. They tell lies and hurry away to meet engagements which they have not made when they are threatened with the hospitalities of my box. Now then, observe what superstition, assisted by a man's reputation, can do. I was to have 12 personal friends to supper one night. One of them was as notorious for costly and elegant cigars as I was for cheap and devilish ones. I called at his house, and when no one was looking, borrowed a double handful of his very choicest, cigars which cost him 40 cents apiece and bore red and gold labels in sign of their nobility. I removed the labels and put the cigars into a box with my favorite brand on it, a brand which those people all knew and which cowed them as men are cowed by an epidemic. They took these cigars when offered at the end of the supper and lit them and sternly struggled with them in dreary silence, for hilarity died when the fell brand came into view and started around. But their fortitude held for a short time only. Then they made excuses and filed out, treading on one another's heels with indecent eagerness. And in the morning, when I went out to observe results, the cigars lay all between the front door and the gate, all except one. That one lay in the plate of the man from whom I had cabbaged the lot. 1 or 2 whiffs was all he could stand. He told me afterward that some day I would get shot for giving people that kind of cigar to smoke. It's pretty interesting. But we're going on with the text by Ken Keyes now. In this prank of Mark Twain's, we find illustrated one of the differences between sane and insane behavior. And I want to insert something here that Korzybski in Science and Sanity would not have called that behavior insane, he would have called it unsane. And it is an important difference. But we'll go ahead with Ken Keyes anyway. So, in this prank of Mark Twain's, we find illustrated one of the differences between sane and unsane behavior. The guests reacted to the fixed ideas in their heads and to the misleading labels they saw, not to the actual cigars they were puffing. In this changing world, about which we have incomplete knowledge, sane thinking demands that we base our actions on a survey of the territory rather than a survey of our mind. Sanity consists in making adequate maps of the territory. People who are locked up in mental hospitals have the habit of projecting onto the territory the verbal maps they cook up in their heads. They are unable to open their eyes and minds and observe clearly what is before them. They think they know what things are like without checking. What they think they know blocks them from evaluating sanely. And on the left of this page, we have a drawing underneath the title or caption, Pen 1 is not Pen 2. There's a guy trying out a pen with a sign that says, LIFO pens, guaranteed not to squirt, leak, break, spout, or rot. And this guy is trying the pen and he just got like splattered with ink. And the salesperson is saying, bad one? So, somewhat funny. Okay, going on with the text on page 109, the snap judgment. Just as a letter sorter in the post office quickly and without any question puts local mail in one bag and out-of-town mail in another, so we, in an automatic and unreflective way, tend to sort out things on the basis of their labels without even trying to observe thing 1, thing 2, thing 3, etc. behind these labels. That automatic response is fine for the job of post office letter sorting, but it is not the kind of thinking that enables us to produce mature judgments in this complex world about which we receive so much misinformation. Only open eyes and open minds will mature us and make real human beings out of us. The snap judgment attitude, with its dogmatic certainty, is a disgrace to a human being. A jackass or a fish is not capable of much reflective thought. They are not able to use their brains over a period of years to mature their attitudes. We humans can mature our thinking if we try. But most people have been trained in such jackass methods of thinking that they seldom learn to use their magnificent brains in anything approaching a magnificent way. And we're on page 110, the last page in the chapter, to sum up. We live in a world where no two things are identical. but we have thinking habits that often mislead us into assuming that two things labeled by the same name are identical. The index numbers will help us think in terms of individual things. For mature thinking, we must be aware of both the similarities and the differences between things that are labeled by the same name. The index numbers will remind us of the dangers of generalizing or thinking in terms of averages. We know that no matter how accurate our average picture or generalization is, we do not know whether it applies to any given individual until we survey the territory and get acquainted with man one or thing one, the particular individual. And that's the end of the chapter. I'm going to go ahead and reread the definition and his instructions just to go along with his instructions to the reader, which were, please reread the following definition of the Watt index several times, then look at it again frequently while you are finishing this chapter. The Watt index is simply a number that is added to a group word to give us a feeling of referring to a specific person or thing. And that is pretty interesting. It's designed to give us a feeling of referring to a specific individual or thing. That's the point of getting in the habit of using index numbers as a way to talk about the individuals in a group. You may do it only in your mind as a person is talking about a group or mixing talk about a group and individuals. And Korzybski in Science and Sanity, which I'll bring up here and transition to it, goes into this quite a bit more. Taming Your Mind, the book that I'm reading into this audiobook, so there's Taming Your Mind, is written by a student of Korzybski named Ken Keyes Jr., and it's kind of how to use general semantics at the language level without getting into a lot of the theory and things that make Science and Sanity a more difficult read. This is selections from Science and Sanity. And it's available from Amazon for around $11. It's not the full book, which is more like a 1,000-page tome, but it was selected by Korzybski and some teachers who were teaching general semantics and Science and Sanity, and it's what they chose to select from it. And it's, I would say, either as good or perhaps even better in some ways, certainly in terms of learning general semantics, than the full book is. That's not to say that the full Science and Sanity isn't interesting and worth a read, but you have to be willing to deal with it, and you also have to be willing to adapt to some strange language and idiosyncrasies. He has abbreviations for etc. of using dot, comma, and comma dot, and various other forms to indicate etc. And he also uses a lot of abbreviations for words like Aristotelian, which just gets capital A, and non-Aristotelian, which in this book gets in brackets non-A, but in the full Science and Sanity book gets an A with a line above it, which is what that little symbol there is. So I would recommend it, but it does require more study than just reading Taming Your Mind does. And I do plan to do audio versions of Science and Sanity. I'm not sure what techniques or versions I'll use for that. And let's see, what other things do I want to say inside this video? Taming Your Mind is by Ken Keyes Jr. with drawings by Ted Key. And it is copyright 1975 by the Living Love Center. However, the book that we're actually reading from is How to Develop Your Thinking Ability by the McGraw-Hill Book Company, New York City, copyrighted in 1950 by Kenneth K. Keyes Jr. and Roberta Reimer Keyes. I'm not at all sure what the copyright status of the book is. I would hope the copyright holders wouldn't have any problem with an audiobook on YouTube, and I'm somewhat thinking that even if they did have a problem, this would fall under fair use, but I'm not asserting that at all. Any new copyright on the audio is covered under a Creative Commons license and Creative Commons with Attribution license, and copyright 2023, specifically 3/4/2023, March 4th, 2023, at 11:32 p.m. What else did we want to get in to this reading? Hopefully nothing. Let's do a couple of tests. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. and testing 1, 2, 3 at the turret. And with that, I'll let you go. May the force be with you, and we'll stop streaming.